I first met him, I think, in 1988 at one of a speech that we were putting on. And I remember hearing him on the Gene Burns show, WRKO, and talking about public education. And I thought, this guy really knows what's going on. It's so gratifying. Sam is a native of New York City, a World War II veteran. So you got to pay attention. He was a World War II vet. You see, they got to know what they're talking about. He became aware of the reading problem, I think, by the late 50s. And he did serve a time as a publisher or an editor for the John Birch Society's arm, Westing Islands. It used to be called our publishing arm. And since then, he's been sort of on his own, doing writing. He's written about over 12 books. Actually, I usually have the books with me, and forgive me if I'm not doing it. Alpha-Phonics is one of his more well-known books, and it's not something, it's how to learn, teach people how to read. And I've used this to teach all of my children. Now my 6-year-old is the next level, and she'll be the last one. That will be my grandchildren that we'll use. So I can say that's at least 2 generations of children learned how to read properly by using this very simple book. And as Sam will point out, no pictures and no puppets popping out of trash cans. You can learn how to read that way. Sam's latest book is Revolution by Education. Probably one of his more well-known books is The NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education. Sam has lectured in all 50 states of the country and other parts of the world. And here he is in a little library in Orange. So let's give him a nice warm hand there.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here in rural America. You know. And I hate to bring you bad news. I wish I could say nice things about the local teachers and all that goes on in these nice small towns all across America. But I have a question to ask you. Have the government schools become a criminal enterprise? And what is the answer? My answer is yes, absolutely. American public schools have become a criminal enterprise, and I will prove it very simply. As a matter of fact, I've written down 11 reasons why you would consider it a criminal undertaking. First of all, let me read you a statement that was made by the National Commission on Excellence in Education, which was made in April of 1983. That's 28 years ago. 28 years ago, this is what they said, quote, "The educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity and threatens our very future as a nation and as a people. If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves," unquote. An act of war against us. In other words, our educators have been at war with us. Now that's a form of treason. And treason, as you know, is a crime. So that's the first crime. The first crime is that they are committing treason against the American people by giving us an education system that has dumbed down America. And of course, we've known about the dumbing down process now for quite a number of years. So that's crime number one, treason. And incidentally, it's a National Education Association that's in charge of all of that, that's been pushing all of that for all of these years. They're a labor union. They used to be a professional organization, but now they're just a labor union. But they believe in world government, and they want to do all kinds of things to destroy our constitutional republic. So, you have that crime. The second crime is that they are out to destroy United States sovereignty and to replace it with world government. And this is all over the education system. You know, they train the children today to become world citizens, not patriotic Americans. As a matter of fact, the whole idea of patriotism has gone out the window. It's now world citizenship, you see. And the NEA curriculum, you know, proves that. You know, the NEA has a convention every year in July, during the July 4th weekend. And during that convention, they have all kinds of resolutions. Well, you can read all of their resolutions, and half of them are about world government. You know, the world court, the world this, the world that. That's what they're interested in, and that's what they're pushing in the schools. They don't want children to become patriotic Americans like you and I. They want them to become world citizens. So that's I think I would consider that a crime if you want to get rid of U.S. sovereignty. I don't know whether it is a crime or not, but to me it is a crime to try to destroy U.S. sovereignty.
I believe that's treason as well.
Pardon?
I believe that is treason as well.
Yes, and it's treason. You're absolutely right. The third crime is that they are deliberately creating functional illiteracy. I don't have to tell you about the reading problem. You know, we first found out about the reading problem back in 1955 when Rudolf Flesch wrote his famous book, Why Johnny Can't Read. How many of you have read that book? None. How many of you have heard of the book? All right, you've all heard Why Johnny Can't Read. That was written in 1955. Now, here we are, 2011. In 2007, just a couple of years ago, the National Endowment for the Arts, liberal organization, produced a survey entitled Reading at Risk, in which the chairman of the organization said that reading now is so poor in America that he says that we're in for a terrible, terrible crisis. Literacy is down. We have declining literacy in the United States, even though we spend more money on education than any nation in the history of the world. And yet, literacy is down. And it's interesting that the people who are in back of this, they think it's fine. They don't think anything's wrong. Yeah, the only reason why they refer to literacy is to get more money from you. They say, well, if you want the children to learn to read, give us more money. Now, we've been giving them more money since 1955. Has reading improved? I'm afraid not. As a matter of fact, let me read to you what the educators consider reading to be. You see, what they do is they use the sight method. They teach children to read English as if it were Chinese. That is, by the sight method. Each little word is supposed to be a little picture. The children have no idea that these words are made up of phonetic segments. They don't see the phonetic structure of the words. All they do is see a little picture. So if they see the word horse, the word on the page says H-O-R-S-E, they will say pony. And the teacher will say, that's wonderful, because the child is seeing the picture. But any child who looks at H-O-R-S-E and says pony can't read. I don't know if you will agree with me on that, but that's my point of view. This is the way this is how they define reading today. This was written in 1991 by 3 professors of what they call whole language. Whole language is the new method that they use. It's not the new method. It's the method that was created in the 1930s, the Dick and Jane method, which was the first of the whole word teaching programs. But now they call it whole language because people caught on to Dick and Jane. Besides, Dick and Jane was very boring. You know, the kids would come to school and they would read, you know, look, look, see spot, jump, you know, oh. And the kids would say, this is stupid, this is ridiculous. You see. So what they do today is they avoid that. What they do is they give the kids, you know, books to read, which are all about witchcraft and wizardry and all kinds of things, that the teacher has to read to them. Haven't you seen these pictures on TV where a politician or some big CEO will be reading to the kids? Instead of the kids reading to the politicians, they're reading to the kids. You don't learn to read by having somebody read to you. You don't learn to play the piano by having somebody play the piano in front of you. You know? So how do they explain what reading is? Well, here's their explanation. Quote, from a whole language perspective, reading and language use in general is a process of generating hypotheses in a meaning-making transaction in a socio-historical context. I'm sure you all got that. As a transactional process, reading is not a matter of getting the meaning from the text, as if that meaning were in the text waiting to be decoded by the reader. Rather, reading is a matter of readers using the cues print provides and the knowledge they bring with them of language subsistence of the world to create a unique interpretation. You see, in other words, if you see the word horse and say pony, well, you know, that's a cue, you see. Moreover, that interpretation is situated. Readers' creations, not retrievals, of meaning with the text vary, depending on their purposes of reading and the expectations of others in the reading event. This view of reading implies that there is no single correct meaning for a given text, only plausible meanings. So that's their definition of reading. In other words, the child makes it up, does it any way he likes, taking cues, you see. So if he sees the word horse and it says pony, well then he's got to think of this story is about a pony, you see, when in reality it may be about a horse. But then he has to use his own imagination, you see. He doesn't retrieve the meaning from the text. He creates the meaning. That's why these kids read the way they do today. As a matter of fact, if you want to find out whether or not your child is a sight reader, it's very easy to do. Open up a page of a magazine or a book that you would like them to read. Have them read it to you out loud. And you will see that they leave out words that are there. They put in words that aren't there. They truncate words. For example, if the word says telephone, they'll say phone. If the word says newspaper, they'll say paper. They misread, they guess, and of course, they have a tough time reading multisyllabic words. So you could tell whether or not your child is a sight reader. The easiest way, however, is to simply ask them, do you like to read? And most of them will say, no, I hate reading. And if they say they hate reading, it's really because they can't read. And this, of course, affects your entire life. So they are deliberately handicapping children with this method of teaching reading. And I would say that that's a crime, to take a perfectly normal child and handicap them for life, give them a handicap. To my mind, that's a crime. When we know how to teach reading, it's not a secret. We're not looking for a cure for cancer. We've known how to teach reading from the very beginning of our country. We were very highly literate in the United States. As a matter of fact, you couldn't have the American Revolution unless you had high literacy, because the documents that were being read by the people at that time were not easy reading. You know, today they'd be at the college level, and everybody could read them. Now, why did we have such high literacy back in the early days? One reason. These people who came to the United States came for religious reasons. And they wanted to set up a Bible commonwealth in America, particularly in New England. In New England, they wanted to create a Bible commonwealth. Those were the Puritans. And so in order to have a Bible commonwealth, everybody had to be able to read the Bible. And the Bible is not an easy book to read. So they taught every child to read at a high level. And so they all became highly literate, and we had a very highly literate society. Well, a highly literate society is also a highly individualistic society. Why? Because if you can read, you then have direct access to all of the knowledge and wisdom of the world. You don't need somebody in front of you to tell you everything. You can do it yourself. You can read. You can curl up in a corner with a book, and you can enjoy reading. You see, well, the progressives who took over America at the turn of the last century were socialists. They wanted a collectivist society. They said individualism is bad, and the only way you can get rid of individualism is to get rid of high literacy. So we will create a method of teaching, a new teaching method that will lower the literacy level of the people and turn children into collectivists. In other words, they'll always want to be around other people. They will not want to be alone in a corner reading a book, because that's antisocial. High literacy is antisocial. And that's why they put in this new teaching method. And that's what we have today. So we have a system that is deliberately dumbing down the American people. And of course, all of that has been documented by Charlotte Iserbyt in her book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. She worked in the Department of Education in Washington, and she found all of these grant programs that were being paid for by your tax money to all of these professors to create a dumbed-down curriculum. And she proves it in her book. And if you want to know how the top people in America consider literacy, let me quote to you from Professor Anthony G. Ottinger of Harvard University. Harvard. You've all heard of Harvard. Well, he's a Harvard professor, professor of Information Resources Policy. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't know if you've heard of the Council on Foreign Relations. It's that body in New York that was created early in the 20th century to lead American foreign policy toward world government. And this is what he told, this is what Professor Ottinger told an audience of CEOs, Canadian CEOs, telecom CEOs, on the subject of literacy. He said, the present traditional concept of literacy has to do with the ability to read and write. But the real question that confronts us today is, how do we help citizens function well in their society? How can they acquire the skills necessary to solve their problems? Do we, for example, really want to teach people to do a lot of sums or write in a fine round hand, cursive, you know? When they have a $5 handheld calculator or a word processor to work with, as if an illiterate can use a word processor, you know? Or do we really have to have everybody literate? writing and reading in the traditional sense when we have the means through our technology to achieve a new flowering of oral communication. You know what that is? Rap, oral communication, you see. Since these kids can't read, they make up all these interesting little poems, and they call it rap, you see. Then he goes on, he says, what is speech recognition and speech synthesis all about if it does not lead to ways of reducing the burden on the individual of the imposed notions of literacy that were a product of 19th century economics and technology? See, he's saying that teaching them to read is imposing a burden on them. It's not liberating them. It's not giving them access to the world's knowledge and wisdom. It's imposing a burden on them. It is and then he goes on, it is the traditional idea that says certain forms of communication, such as comic books, are bad, but in the modern context of functionalism, they may not be all that bad, unquote. Well, let me ask you this. How many parents send their kids to school to learn to read comic books? Parents send their kids to be taught to read in the traditional manner, by phonics, by the phonetic method. That's how it was always done back in the old days, and that's when it created high literacy. So why do they, and he said, do we have to have everybody literate? Well, why do we have public schools? That was the whole rationale behind government and public schools, to make sure that everybody in America was literate. And now he's saying, no, we don't need that. Yes, he wants the kids forced into the schools, not to make them literate, but to indoctrinate them in whatever garbage they want, which is socialism, world government. That's what they want, you see. I would consider destroying the literacy of a nation as a crime. How many of you agree with me there? Good. I'm glad you agree with me.
Amen.
Because it is a crime to destroy the literacy of a nation, let alone an individual. It's a horrible thing to turn children against books, to turn them against the knowledge and wisdom of the world, you see. And we have a school system that deliberately does that day in and day out. And I know that, because whenever I've tried to get this into the schools, they won't see it. I don't hear from them. I get, you know, for example, in Newark, New Jersey, 60% of the kids can't read in the schools of Newark, New Jersey. And so the mayor of Newark, New Jersey was at a special luncheon with the founder of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. And he convinced Mark to provide $100 million for the purpose of improving the schools. And there was a lot of publicity about it, and Mark attended a press conference along with the mayor and the governor of New Jersey, all three of them, that now with this $100 million we are going to improve education. Well, when I saw that, I said, gee, I ought to let them know that I can take any classroom. I offer to take the worst school in Newark and turn it into the best school in a period of less than a year. Because if you teach everybody to read in that school, they will become the best. I wrote them a letter, outlined the plan, and you know what kind of a response I got? Zero. None at all. So then I followed it up with a more detailed plan on how this could be done. Very detailed. Sent it to the three individuals. You know what kind of a response I got? Zero. They're not interested. They weren't even curious. They weren't even, how would you say, courteous enough to send at least a thank you note. At least I got a thank you note from the superintendent of schools in New York City when I offered him the same thing. And he sent me a very nice note saying, thank you for your interest in our schools, but no thanks for your program. So they don't want to know how to do it right, because they know it can be done right. It was done right in this country for many years. Another crime. You see, when they teach children to read in this manner, in the look-say manner, the whole word manner, the sight manner, the whole language manner, the children become frustrated. Because, you see, every child enters school having taught himself to speak his own language. You know that every child learns to speak his own language automatically without a certified teacher around. And so they're very intelligent. At that time in life, the brain is working like a dynamo, language learning dynamo. Why? Because God gave us a language faculty. It's in the brain. Every human being is born with a language faculty. No other species has that. So we learn language very quickly. And so a child feels very intelligent at that very young age. And so when they enter school, they feel intelligent and they say, oh, well, I can learn to read. What is there to this reading problem? But then when they get into school, the teaching methods distort the brain. They distort the brain by forcing the child to use a right brain method for a left brain function. And when you do that, you create a distorted brain. And brain specialists have been able to see this on brain scans. They can see what happens when the child is deprived of phonetic reading. It's a distortion of the brain tissue. Now that can be repaired. You know, the brain is very flexible. That can be repaired. But unless they know how to repair it, it'll remain that way for the child's life, you see. So he will have you might say, a maimed brain. It'll be maimed by the methods. And because they have this frustration, they develop what is known as attention deficit disorder, ADD, or ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, because when you're frustrated in a classroom, you know you're intelligent, but you know now you feel stupid, and you know that something in the classroom is doing it to you, which is why kids learn to hate school and hate their teachers, and why they now burn down schools, create vandalism, and even shoot teachers these days. They know something horrible is happening to them. And so they develop ADD and ADHD. These are artificial conditions caused by the frustration that these teaching methods create. You see. Now, I would consider turning a child into ADD or ADHD as a crime. How many would agree with me that's a crime?
Yeah.
To do that? Now, another way they do that, create attention deficit disorder, is to make it very difficult to concentrate in the classroom. The classroom configuration has changed. You remember the open classroom? They got rid of the open classroom, now it's semi-open classroom. And the kids, you know, when I was going to school, and I can speak from experience because I'm probably the oldest person in this room. I don't know if I'm older than that gentleman. I'm 85.
I'm only 67.
Oh, you're just a kid.
What was that?
I'm only 67.
You're only 67?
Yeah.
My God.
You're smart for 67.
It's the beer.
Well, anyway, so I am the oldest person in the room. And I went to school back in the days when you couldn't possibly have attention deficit disorder. Why? because you sat in desks that were bolted to the floor. You sat in rows. The teacher was up front. She was the focus of attention. The focus of attention. And she was teaching you to read in a logical way. She was teaching everything in a rational, logical way. You didn't talk to your fellow students. The walls were bare. In my classroom, there was a portrait of George Washington. That's it. And in the front of the classroom, along the board, was cursive writing, you know, the alphabet in cursive writing. We learned cursive in the first grade. We never learned to print. Print was something you did later on in art class. If you wanted to make a poster, then you learned to print. But first, you learned cursive writing. So you would never confuse a B and a D in cursive. You know, because in cursive, a B starts like an L, and a D starts like an A, you see. So you'll never confuse the two. Or an F and a T, you see. So cursive helps you learn to read. And this has been proven over and over again. And a friend of mine in Odessa, Texas, who teaches children, remedial children, how to read, finds that cursive helps them learn to read. Well, anyway, so ADD, you go into today's classrooms, what do you see in the first grade, in today's first grade classrooms? You see kids are now seated around little tables.
On the floor.
They're now facing each other. Oh, thank you very much. They're now facing each other. They're coughing in each other's faces. See, when I was going to school, you coughed in the back of the head of the student. Today they cough in each other's faces. They pester each other. How could you concentrate if the kids around you are pestering you? Everybody is doing something different. In our classroom, everybody did the same thing. We learned the short vowels. You know, the longer A-E-I-O-U, A-E-I-A, A-E-I-A, A-E-I-A. Very nice, you know, easy. Today, well, the way they teach reading, and the kids never learn the phonetic structure of the language anyway. But then they're pestering at one another. The walls are covered with every possible kind of poster you can think of. You may have gerbils. You may have goldfish. You'll have mobiles hanging from the ceiling, swinging in the breeze. How can you concentrate? How do you concentrate in such a classroom? You can't. And do you know that all of this is planned? They know that they create ADD by those methods. All of this has been planned. Nothing in an American classroom is there accidentally. It's all been planned by the educators. Nothing is accidental. So, would you consider causing ADD a crime, attention deficit, having a classroom configuration that causes these problems criminal in intent?
And especially prescribing the medications that compound the situation.
Well, that's the next criminal act. Well, now that you create ADD and ADHD, what's the solution to the problem? It isn't to reorder the classroom. It isn't to create a quiet environment where kids can concentrate. No, it's to drug them. Drug them with Ritalin, Adderall, you name it, you see. Now, the schools are pushing drugs. Is drug pushing a crime or not?
Oh, yeah.
If you take the same drugs that are being pushed in schools and went out on the streets of Orange and began selling them to passerbys or your friends, you'd be put in jail. Because those drugs are quite strong. They have the potency of cocaine, these drugs. You see. that they're giving the kids. And incidentally, some of these drugs are lethal because what Ritalin does, it constricts the flow of blood to the heart. So when you have a kid dropping dead on the playing field, that's the cause. You'll find out, oh, well, he's been on Ritalin for the last 5 years. And he's had a heart attack. Can you imagine a 12-year-old having a heart attack? A 15-year-old having a heart attack? But they do, because of these drugs that constrict the flow of blood to the heart. So that's Criminal Act number 5. Criminal Act number 6. With sex education, the educators are contributing to the delinquency of minors. That's a crime, isn't it? If parents have a party in their home and serve liquor, they can be locked up. Why? Because they are contributing to the delinquency of a minor. And what does sex ed do? It encourages sexual experimentation, premarital sex education. And in fact, what they give out in the schools today are condoms, and the teachers demonstrate them with a cucumber in the classroom. I mean, you know, that's pretty awful. And parents' rights are violated all the time. For example, a parent in Lexington, Mass. was jailed because he complained that his first grade child was being indoctrinated in the gay lifestyle. He complained. He said, I want my kid out of that classroom. And they said, oh no, you cannot opt for your child to be out of that special sex education thing. And when he complained, they put him in jail. So whatever happened to parents' rights? They're out the window. So I submit to you that they are contributing to the delinquency of minors, and that is a crime. Does anyone disagree?
No.
Good. The next crime, now I don't know if this is a crime, but to me it is. They are deliberately destroying the religious beliefs of the students. They're destroying Christianity. As you know, anything Christian in the schools these days, they get rid of. Let me put this down. Even Christmas carols, you can't sing Christmas carols. Now, what's the result? If children are deprived of their traditional religion, the religion of their parents, what do you get? You get nihilism, atheism, secular humanism, Satanism. All this is what you get in place of Christianity. And of course, we've seen that Satanism leads to murder. You've all heard of Columbine High School. Those kids had become Satanists. And wherever you hear of these murders and these attempted massacres in public schools, they are the result of the fact that these kids have become Satanists. See, when I was going to school, the principal read the 23rd Psalm in our assembly. And that had a great positive influence on all of us, the 23rd Psalm. But here in the public schools, they say there is no God, you're the product of evolution, you're just an animal, if it feels good, do it, And of course the kids respond to that, because the kids don't have to obey the 10 Commandments, you see. They can do anything they want, they can shoplift, because, whoever heard of thou shalt not steal? Thou shalt not kill. They're killing in schools. Nobody killed when I was going to school. The idea of a massacre taking place in a public school was unheard of. But today, with the getting rid of religion, now, you might say that technically destroying a child's religion is not a crime. But I think it's a moral crime. It may not be a legal crime to do it. Because recently here, now it was in New Hampshire, a homeschooling couple got divorced. And the mother wanted to keep homeschooling the child. The father wanted the child to be in the public school. And the judge said that the child should go into the public school because she is too religious and has to be confronted with opposing views. So here's a judge that is condoning this moral crime. I call it a moral crime. It's not a legal crime, but it's a moral crime. So there you are.
I would argue, sir, if I may, I would argue that it may be a legal crime because of the Constitution's
Separation.
well, actually, yeah, of the right to
Separation,
religion.
yeah, of church and state.
Not establishing
Yeah.
a state church.
Forgive my boisterousness, please.
Well, anyway, another crime that I consider to be that they're doing in the schools, now this also may be a moral crime and not a legal crime, is that they teach something called death education. How many of you have heard of death education? All right, we know several people have. In death education, they take the kids to cemeteries, funeral homes. They write their own obituaries. You heard of that? Children writing their own obituaries? Yes, they do that in school. And it has led to teenage suicide. So here are teaching techniques that lead to suicide. Now, is that a crime? I believe it is a crime, but it's not a legal crime. But if you lead someone to suicide, well, of course, if you take part in administering, in helping a person commit suicide, that is a crime, is it not? What Dr. Kevorkian was doing, that's a crime. Well, we don't have Dr. Kevorkians in the school. We have their disciples, So that's another reason why I consider the government schools to have become a criminal enterprise. Another reason why I consider the schools to be a criminal enterprise is because they are indoctrinating socialism, collectivism, group activity, group think. It's easier to manipulate a group than a single individual. And that's why they hate individualism. And that's why they love this group think idea, because then they can indoctrinate the entire class into believing that socialism is the wave of the future. Socialism is good, individualism is bad. I consider that a crime. Another crime, which is so obvious, the public schools, the public school system is a monopoly. Aren't monopolies supposed to be bad? Didn't we break up the telephone company because it was a monopoly? How come this monopoly can become more of a monopoly every day and nobody says anything about it? Monopolies are bad because they distort the marketplace. They force people to do things they don't want to do. And particularly public education. Now, the National Education Association, they are, the National Education Association wants to get rid of private preschool businesses. You know, most of the preschools in this country are private little schools that are run by families, parents, etc. And they do very well. They perform a wonderful service for parents who have to work and have to put their kids somewhere. And of course, and that's called early childhood education. Now the NEA wants to get rid of the private preschools, so in their latest resolution they wrote, or they passed this resolution that says it's early childhood education. The National Education Association supports early childhood education programs in the public schools for children from birth through age 8. From birth through age 8. Would you give a newborn child to the National Education Association? You'd have to be out of your mind. Because you know what they're going to do. They're going to make sure that child is dumbed down, never learns to read, becomes ADD or ADHD, becomes a ward of the state practically. But the reason why they want that and they pass that resolution is because they want to get rid of the private preschools. They're afraid that some of these private preschools are run by conservatives. You know, that these kids may be watching Glenn Beck. Just shows you how bad these things are. So, since monopolies, it's so obvious that they want more of a monopoly than they already have. Now, of course, they're not going to touch the big private schools, the fancy private schools for the upper elite, for the children of Dr. Ottinger. See, his kids will go to Choate or Groton or one of these fancy that only the elite at the top go. Or the, what is that Quaker school in Washington where the two Obama girls go. They don't go to the public schools in Washington because 90% of the kids in the public schools of Washington can't read. You see. And incidentally, the gal who was superintendent there, R-H-E-E, I forget her first name. I also offered to teach the kids there, the worst schools, and turn them into the best schools. And of course, I got no response. You know, it reminds me of the comedian who said, "I don't get no respect." You know? I don't get no response. But anyway, that's what happens when you try to, you know. And the reason why I do it, although I know they're not going to respond, although I know I'm not going to get anywhere, I do it for the simple reason that I have to say that I tried. I have to say that I made the effort, that I wrote the letters.
You exhausted a remedy.
That's the most important thing to do, is to be able to say, I tried and was rejected. Well, and there is another crime. Have you heard of extortion?
Yes.
Extortion is a crime, isn't it?
Yes.
And what is extortion? It's getting money out of people under false pretenses, right? Robbing.